morning, everybody. I'm Ashley Rooney from the Lexington Remembers WWII Committee. And today we are interviewing a survivor from World War II. Her name is Tuulikki Loring. She lived in Finland for years and then came here to Lexington, where she lived here for over 40 years. Before we get started, I thought we would talk a little bit about the history of Finland because it's a bit confusing during World War II. Finland is often ranked #1 for being the happiest country in the world, as the Finns have high incomes, health care for all, and a top educational system. On the other hand, they've had their problems, as we all have. Originally, it was a Grand Duchy of Russia until 1917, when it became independent. In October 1939, the Soviet Union demanded military bases on Finnish soil, but the Finns refused. This caused the Soviet Union to start a military invasion against Finland on 30 November 1939. The Finns were able to defend their country for about 3.5 months. The Winter War, as it was known, ended in March 1940 with the Moscow Peace Treaty, in which Finland lost the Karelian Isthmus to the Soviet Union. Russia was expelled from the League of Nations because of its illegal attack, and Finland received lots of international goodwill and material help from many countries during that war. After the Winter War, the Finnish army was exhausted and needed recovery and support as soon as possible, but the British declined to help. In October 1940, Nazi Germany offered weapon deals to Finland if the Finnish government would allow German troops to travel through Finland to occupied Norway. Finland accepted. Weapon deals were made, and military cooperation began in December 1940. In the Tehran Conference of 1942, the leaders of the Allies agreed that Finland was fighting a separate war against the Soviet Union, and that in no way was it hostile to the Western Allies. The Soviet Union was the only Allied country against which Finland had conducted military operations. During and between the wars, approximately 80,000 Finnish war children were evacuated. 5% went to Norway, 10% to Denmark, and the rest to Sweden. Most of the children were sent back by 1948, but 15 and 20% remained abroad, and Tuulikki will tell us more about that. Finland managed to defend its democracy contrary to most other countries within the Soviet sphere of influence, and suffered comparably limited losses in terms of civilian lives and property. After the war, it had to pay large reparations and resettle an eighth of its population, having lost an eighth of its territory. Its role in the Second World War was in many ways strange. It had signed the Anti-Comintern Pact, which made Finland an ally with Germany in the war against the Soviet Union. But unlike all other Axis states, Finland never signed the Tripartite Pact. Finland was never an Axis nation. Now I'm going to turn to Tuulikki Loring.
There was one thing I think, that Finland was independent since 1917. So anyhow, I don't really know where to start, but I can say that there is probably a picture what is explained what was taken during the interim time when we had a peace, and then there was I don't remember too much until I was about 3 years old, and the vivid memory I have when I was about 5, when my mother took us to Sweden, to Skåne. She was bilingual, and she was able to help and place the children into families. And of course, it was kind of Swedes loved the blonde little girls and the boys, and the less attractive children were placed the last. And I can just feel for them how they must have felt, because nobody wanted them immediately.
Oh dear.
Of course, my mother had a hard time because I was with her all the time and everybody wanted to have me. Anyhow, so we came back maybe a year later, and we were placed to country because there was very, very heavy bombing in Helsinki because Russia really wanted to put Finland on their knees, literally. We only had like 25 planes and they came with 400 over Helsinki. So I was there for a short time and I distinctly remember how we had to go to the bomb cellar. I don't remember too much about it, but I have never forgotten the sound of the sirens and the smell of the damp bomb cellar with damp concrete, what still bothers me if I smell it anyway. So that's my memory of that.
Was that in your house or was it a shelter that you went to?
Every single house in Helsinki had a bomb shelter. We were able to shelter every single citizen, either to the common shelters in Helsinki or the private in the homes. See, we have been building them since Russia had been a threat to us so long time. So, but I was lucky to spend time in country, and I do remember how frightened I was of the Russian prisoners who were working at the field in country because our men were all fighting until 1945 when the war was over. So, and I do remember some of the children who were Karelians, and there was a little bit about animosity towards them because we did have to find a home for 350,000 plus Karelians.
The Karelians are who now? Explain that again.
We had to find a house for the Karelians who left Karelia because Russia took Karelia over. We lost Karelia.
Okay, good. So Karelia was part of Denmark.
Yeah. And one recollection I have is when we went to visit relatives area in Finland where Russia had demanded the military base. They leased it for 100 years after we lost the war. And when we went with train through that area, the train had barricades put on windows and lights on so we couldn't see what was going on. But for some reason, 1956, Russia released the military base and we were able to go through it. So of course my father immediately took us there and we could see what had happened. And it was another story, but it was very different to get it back. So the fields were gone, but there were a lot of military construction, which we now have.
You mentioned to me when we talked about your father, how you hadn't seen him.
Yes, this is a thing. My father came back and I saw him. I have seen him perhaps before, but I don't recall it. And my mother went to, of course, visit my father at the field. Women were allowed to do that. And of course, the Lottas lived with the military at the field. But when my father came back and my mother said to me, "Here is your father," I was speaking Swedish at the time. I spoke both languages, but I spoke Swedish with my mother when I didn't want anybody else to know it. Of course, everybody knew it probably, including my father. And I told my mother, I'm sorry, Mom, you got to get rid of a strange man. I don't want him with us. And my father was very hurt, of course, and he was so young, he was only his mid-30s, that it took him very badly. And I think it had a big difference in our relationship, because my sister was that cute half-a-year-old child. So anyhow, and one thing I remember specifically, we were lucky to have fairly good food at the country, because there was severe shortages, as even in the United States you have shortages. But we have severe shortages, but we always had food at the country. But we didn't have wheat, and we only have rye, what was of course very beneficial for our health. But my mother made me a birthday cake because she has gotten some white flour, and I told my mother, I really don't care for this. Of course, that was very disappointing.
You become accustomed to rye flour, huh?
Yeah. And I was also allergic to milk, what we had plenty, but I could only drink buttermilk and then this malt drink, and I have been loving beer ever since. We went to school right after war. I went to school 1947, and the war was over 45, and we had been paying heavily for war reparations. Yeah, and we also, I want to mention, we're the only country what paid US back for anything we had borrowed.
Oh, good for you.
The only country. But it was quite, the trip to school was long, and we had to do it by feet because there was no cars. The cars ran with coal, and of course that was horrible. I even know one of the people who died of breathing that with the cars. But we walked to school, and winter time, I went to school, of course, September, and wintertime, it was one of the coldest winters and very much snow. And so many kids did not go to school. My parents thought I should. So we walked to school, and of course it took half a day to dry the clothes when we have been tramping in the waist-deep snow. But we made it to the school, and we dried our clothes, and believe it or not, we had school food. It was cold soup, what we had to eat from our own dishes, what we had to wash with cold water. So I was very finicky eater, having to eat fairly nice food all the time. And of course, I asked my parents if I could be able to not to eat the food like many of my friends. I lived in fairly poor area. And my parents said, no, it is food and you eat with the rest of the children. So I used to fill my cheeks with the skin, these pieces of meat, because it wasn't the best kind of meat, like pea soup had hair from a pig skin. No. So I asked to be able to go to the outside house, and I just threw it out. I had my own way, but they watched that you emptied your dish.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very good. American children made care packages what were sent to children in Finland. And I specifically remember my husband doing them in Lexington in his class. And I received one, and it had soap, and it had toothpaste, and it had toy, some sort of a game what I had no idea what to do with, but I was happy to get it, and chewing gum. But we had a lady in my area what was handing American, we called huppa gum, but I understood it was hapa gum. And she gave it to us for little favors.
Oh.
So I was able to have gum.
Gosh.
So, but I remember that life was tough, but I still went to rural country every single summer vacation until I was in high school when things were much better already.
What school in Lexington did your husband go to?
Monroe.
So Monroe, let's give Monroe at least a kudo that they were sending those boxes to you. Did you get them through the mail? How did you get them? Were they?
I do not remember. They came to school.
They came to the school. Okay. You must have been thrilled. Somebody gave you a box and there was all this stuff in there.
Yeah, they sort of divvied it out for who get. Not all the boxes were equally as valuable. But the only candy we had was this pink powder in the little paper pouch, what you pour into your mouth.
Oh, yeah. They still have something like that. Yes.
That was the candy we had.
Gosh, interesting. Now, there were no soldiers around, nobody overlooking you all, worrying about no American presence other than these boxes?
No.
No.
No, I lived on a suburb of Helsinki.
Okay.
And at that time, when I was in school, my father built a house on our summer cottage.
Yeah.
So we lived there.
And you still have that summer cottage, right? You still go.
That was torn down, and my sister, after my mother died, we divided, and I gave my sister a piece of land. She built a house for herself, and my father's beautiful home, what he built in late 50s, early 60s, what I only saw short time when I came back from Finland, from US, where I was au pair. So I came back, I saw it short time, and after my mother died, we sold that house.
Okay.
And so, and that was a lovely house because my father died at 56 and he was height of his career. He built luxury homes.
Oh, just like here.
So, but then mother lived several years afterwards, but also died young. They both died of lung cancer.
Oh, all that coal.
Due to the asbestos.
Where did they get the asbestos?
They were, the pipes were insulated against the coal with, in cellar with asbestos.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And my father was at the construction sites. He built luxury homes in Helsinki.
Mm-hmm.
So he was at the construction site all the time and got
the asbestos.
Yeah, but it was really fun. I have a fun story since it leads to another. When I was in high school, I loved to go to visit my father, where he was building these luxury homes, and he had his own cook who cooked beautiful meals for him. So I always went to visit him, and then I could have coffee and beautiful pastries. But things were pretty good in Finland already in 50s and 60s.
Yeah. Even in my household, my parents often talked about the time of the war. Did your parents go back in that, or were they just moving forward?
I was able to, when they had parties, I was able to eardrop. I was supposed to be sleeping.
Right.
And I heard stories what were so bad that I cannot talk about them. Because my father was an officer, and the schools talked the young boys to go to fight. And you can imagine what happened if they started deserting at the middle of field fight. So you can see, you can understand what was going. Needless to talk about it.
Yeah.
And also, they saw Russian prisoners who had no food because Finns couldn't give any, so they ate frozen potatoes. So winter war, for example, was a disaster.
Yeah.
So I heard those stories.
Yeah.
And I still carry them, and I can't even be mad at Russians. They were so horrendous, the stories. The poor guys fought without any winter clothes. And the temperature was -40 Fahrenheit.
No, that'd be terrible. You're talking more about the Russians and not much about the Germans here. Not many memories of
I don't recall Germans at all, except that there were a lot of Finnish Jews who came to Finland, Russian Jews who came to Finland the 30s. And they fought together with the German soldiers against Russia because they were so patriotic Finnish. They were Finnish at the time. And I had few Jewish friends I was very fond of.
Did the Finns, while being part of Nazi Germany, was there much persecution of the Jews at that point?
No, because they fought for Finland in Finnish army with the Nazi German.
Okay, so they left them alone.
Yeah. And Finland did not send the Jews to Germany, even Russia demanded it. We did not. After we lost the war, that is.
Oh, I see. Okay. And how did your little sister do during all this process?
Well, she was too young to remember. Unfortunately, she is the one who remembers everything from 1956 on.
Oh, heck.
She has memory like, she was able to tell me how Porkkala, that military base, looked when we went there. And I do not recall it. I just remember going there with my father's Skoda car.
Let's talk about how you got to the United States.
Well, it's kind of embarrassing because I should have gone to mathematics, but in Finnish school system, from the middle of the high school, you have to make a decision if you want to go to humanities or mathematics. And I chose languages. And of course, I spoke Swedish and Finnish, so that was okay. And I learned French very well, to the point that my teacher took us to Paris for 1 week with 2 chaperones with all these young kids.
Wow.
But that was the world at the time.
Yeah.
So, but I hated German language, so I flunked that, and I despised my English teacher. So I didn't even want to learn English. So I flunked that. And the way the school system was in Finland, you had to take everything. You couldn't flunk any. You had 1 summer to learn it and try to pass it autumn. But if you didn't, you had to go back to the same class. And believe it or not, I had one of the best averages, but I could not continue because I couldn't pass German and English. So I said, okay. And I had a summer position because I always worked summer times. I wanted to have my own money. So I worked at the Shell oil company. I was doing the telephone because I spoke 2 languages. And so then I did the calculations how much oil was in the tank when the temperature changes. So the oil level changes. That was my job.
Not a bad job for a kid.
Yeah.
Sounds
But
complicated.
the one thing my parents did not like, that end of the day, and it was dark, autumn in Finland, I had to walk with the cash deposits up the hill to the bank what had an outside deposit.
Oh.
My parents did not like me to handling that much money alone. So I was taking place of this girl who was coming back from United States, where she was au pair in Lincoln. And she said she had a wonderful boyfriend in Lexington. And there was a family of MIT and Harvard professors who were looking for au pair girl from Finland. And I told my parents the same day I'm leaving. And they say, oh no, where are you going? And I explained, and they found out where I was going and knew about it. So they okayed it. And I had to take boat to Sweden, a train from Sweden, what went on the boat. The train went to boat. We in Finland had different gauge railroad because we have to obey Russian railroad size. So we had to change trains in middle of Finland to change to the other gauge to get to Sweden.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting anyhow. So then I took a boat from Rotterdam to New York City. And at that time...
Were you all by yourself doing all this?
Yes.
And how old were you?
20.
Okay.
So, because our school system is like second year, like junior college, we have different. So anyhow, I arrived to New York City, believe it or not, to Manhattan, and we went by Statue of Liberty. And I saw that, and it was unbelievable sight, because in 50s you didn't have anything, you know, no televisions really. Even we had one of the first televisions in my family, and all you could hear is Estonia and Russia stations. So no Finnish language even, but we were thrilled to see television. I only have sent a picture what was about 3 inches by 2.5 inches, and there were 2,000 passengers. And when we boarded, this man from Lexington in little Volkswagen was supposed to recognize me. And he did. And he was Jewish, and he wanted to show me where he was from in Brooklyn. Right, Brooklyn? Yeah.
It's Brooklyn.
And he took me to and I saw all the Hasidic Jews, and I was totally culture shocked by them. Totally.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about them. And I expected that that's what they looked in Lexington. So anyhow, my first meal was Chinese food, which of course I could not eat at all. So then I arrived 12 o'clock night to Lexington. The boat arrived 5. And so the next morning I got a phone call from this young man in Lexington, and he took me to the party in Harvard Square in Rolls-Royce, antique Rolls-Royce, with several Scandinavian girls. And that's when I saw my first slum. Right corner of the Lamont Library, there was a string of sort of old wooden buildings owned by Bertha Collins, who was the biggest property owner and they were horrible shape. And these Harvard students lived there, and they had a party.
Yeah.
So what a culture shock. I knew about Harvard University, but I didn't expect that there were slums next to it.
Yes.
I ended up living my first month of my marriage in that slum apartment. But I learned very quickly because I visited Lexington at my husband-to-be family, and they were exactly like my family in Finland, so I felt extremely cozy. And then I met the Finnish family in Lexington, the Lindells, who became a total help for me because I could speak Finnish every week with her. I visited her every week. And my family was quite lovely. They were just a little bit older than me, and they had 2 young children who I took care of.
Tell about how you met the young child many years later.
Oh, that is interesting. I was married, of course, and it was many, many years later because she was free when I left. And she was young adult studying student, and she was helping catering. And I went to this fancy party, catered party in Boston. And this blonde, blue-eyed girl came to me and looked at me and said that, "Do you mind if I ask you a question?" I said, "Of course not." And she said, "Are you Tuulikki Loring?" And I said, "Yes." And I got teary eyes. I said, "You are Annie."
She was the little girl you took care of.
I wouldn't have recognized her, but she would have been the only one who would know I was Tuulikki Loring. I was friendly with her mother because she lived in Lexington after I moved to Lexington.
Right.
We already lived in Lexington then when I met her. So, but I have never seen a picture of her as an adult.
Gone full circle all the way around.
Yeah. And her brother, who was very asthmatic, I had a hard time taking care of him because he was so sickly, became a lawyer and lives in, I believe, in Wellesley, but I have not seen him. Yeah.
Your story is a wonderful story of somebody who went through the war, even though you didn't have the most horrendous of experiences.
No, I did.
And you remembered those bombs and the smell of the shelter. It must have been awful as a little kid. How very terrifying.
And of course, my relationship with my father never became good until I came back as au pair. And my father was already very sick. He has had one of his lungs removed, and he was home. And he was very sweet to me. And he was very lucky. He was alive when we got married. And he was brought from hospital to our house in Marianiemi, where we lived, in the house my father built. We had the wedding reception there. And my father was lying in back room in the bed, hospital bed. He couldn't walk or anything anymore. And he did meet my husband, and he told my husband, he was very funny man, even he was dying, he was funny. He said, "Oh, I lift my hat for you that you dare to take that daughter of mine." Yeah, those were the last words he said to Selden, and I had to translate them, of course.
Yes, yeah. No, those are nice words.
When we left, it was very sad. I hugged my father goodbye, and it was really only second time I hugged him. He hugged me when I came back, and there was disagreement with my mother, and my father took me to his lap and hugged me, and that was the first time he has ever done it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was 21 years old.
Just beginning to wrap up, is there anything momentous you can say? I mean, you've gone through quite a life. I mean, I've lived in America all my life, so it's a totally different world.
Of course, it has been really hard because I got married 63. There were no jet planes to Finland, or it was really hard because I missed my family terribly. And my mother came only 3 times because when she was widowed, she spent all her money taking care of my father in private hospital because we had good medical care, but my father begged my mother not putting him there. So he was in private hospital, private care from May till August when he died, and that nearly bankrupted my mother.
Mm-hmm.
It was very expensive. So she couldn't come to visit me, and she only came twice when I took the children twice to Finland to see her. And she came twice and she spent a month with me, what was wonderful. But the rest of the time I missed every wedding, every christening, every this, and I had 33 cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So here I was in family what only had 4 children who I saw rarely because they didn't live near us.
Yeah.
So it did change my life, and it changes my life now because when my husband is dead and my family is spread out, I am sort of in between England, Finland, and United States. So I try to travel amongst the countries, and of course I have another hardship now.
And of course we're in the middle of a pandemic and you can't travel most of those places.
Yeah. I am EU citizen, so if I want to sneak, I can leave the country with my US passport, what I have to do, and I can arrive to Finland with my Finnish citizenship.
Oh, just switch passports. I thought that only happened on TV shows. Well,
no, I have 2 of them.
Yeah. Well, Tuulikki, I thank you so much for speaking today.